At 26 years old, Daniel Carter had already failed at 3 different business ventures. His first startup, an innovative smart backpack, collapsed due to high production costs. His second, an eco-friendly water bottle, never secured funding. His third, a mobile app designed for freelancers, failed to attract users. Now, broke and exhausted, Daniel sat in his tiny apartment, staring at his laptop screen. He had poured his heart and soul into his ideas, yet nothing had worked. "Maybe I'm just not cut out for this," he muttered. That night, as he scrolled through the news, he saw an announcement. Jeff Bezos would be speaking at a business summit in his city. For a moment, he considered going, but then the self-doubt crept in. Even if I went, how could I possibly meet Jeff Bezos? But deep down, something inside him whispered, what if this is the moment that changes everything? And so he made a bold decision. He had to find a way to meet Jeff Bezos. The conference hall was packed with thousands of aspiring entrepreneurs. Daniel managed to get a seat near the front, watching Jeff Bezos step onto the stage. The energy in the room shifted immediately. For an hour, Bezos shared his journey, how he took risks, ignored the doubters, and focused on long-term success. Then, Bezos said something that hit Daniel like a thunderbolt. Failure is just practice for success. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had been seeing his failures as proof that he wasn't good enough, but what if they were actually steps toward something greater? At the end of the talk, attendees lined up to shake hands with Bezos, but Daniel knew he had to do more than that. As Bezos walked toward the exit, Daniel took a deep breath, stepped forward, and spoke up. "Mr. Bezos, can I ask you one question?" Bezos stopped, turned around, and smiled. "Sure, what's your question?" Daniel's heart pounded. This was his moment. Daniel quickly explained his situation. "I've failed 3 times. I've put everything into my businesses, but nothing has worked. If you were me, what would you do next?" Bezos looked at him for a moment, then asked, "Tell me, are your failures stopping you, or are they teaching you?" Daniel froze. Bezos continued, "Amazon lost millions in its early years. People told me I was insane for trying to sell books online. But failure isn't a stop sign, it's a lesson. The only difference between successful entrepreneurs and those who quit is this. Successful ones learn and keep going." Daniel nodded, taking in every word. Then Bezos leaned in and said something that would stay with him forever. "If you quit now, you'll never know how close you were to success." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He realized his failures had never been the problem. His mindset was. Daniel decided to restart his journey, but this time he needed to think differently. So he emailed 50 potential customers and asked them a simple question. What's the biggest problem you wish someone would solve for you? The responses opened his eyes. He had been creating businesses based on what he wanted, not what people needed. A few weeks later, Daniel started developing a new product, a software that automated e-commerce inventory management for small businesses. But just as he was gaining momentum, he hit a massive setback. A key investor backed out. His funding evaporated overnight. For a moment, he thought about quitting again. But then he remembered Bezos' words. "If you quit now, you'll never know how close you were to success." So instead of quitting, he did something bold. He sent Jeff Bezos an email. Daniel never expected a reply, but a week later he got one. A personalized email from Jeff Bezos himself. "Daniel, I remember our conversation. Entrepreneurship is never easy, but if you truly believe your product helps people, don't stop now. Find a way. I wish you luck. Jeff." It wasn't a long email, but it was enough. Daniel doubled down. He pitched his idea to 100 small business owners. 20 agreed to try it. Within 6 months, his company had its first 1,000 customers. 1 year later, he was profitable. 2 years later, Daniel sat in his own office running a thriving company. One day, he got an invitation, a private business roundtable with Jeff Bezos. As he walked into the room, Bezos recognized him and smiled. "Daniel, how's the business?" Daniel grinned. "We just hit our 50,000th customer last month." Bezos nodded approvingly. "I told you, failure is just practice for success." Daniel realized something. If he had quit that night after the investor backed out, none of this would have happened. His biggest lesson? Success isn't about having no failures. It's about pushing forward anyway. 2 years later, Daniel sat in his own office running a thriving company. One day, he got an invitation, a private business roundtable with Jeff Bezos. As he walked into the room, Bezos recognized him and smiled. "Daniel, how's the business?" Daniel grinned. "We just hit our 50,000th customer last month." Bezos nodded approvingly. "I told you, failure is just practice for success." Daniel realized something. If he had quit that night after the investor backed out, none of this would have happened. His biggest lesson? Success isn't about having no failures. It's about pushing forward anyway. Despite Daniel's newfound momentum, challenges continued to test his resilience. One morning, he woke up to an email from his biggest client, a company that made up 40% of his revenue. They had decided to terminate their contract due to economic concerns. Daniel felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just a setback, it was a crisis. Without that client, his business could collapse within months. For the first time in 2 years, Daniel wondered, was I just lucky all along? Can I really keep this going? Instead of panicking, he remembered Bezos' words. When things go wrong, don't freeze. Adapt. He sat down and analyzed the situation. Why had his client left? The economic downturn made them cautious. They felt his software was too expensive for their new budget. Daniel had two options. One, give up, accept the loss, and risk the downfall of his company. 2, find a way to make his product more accessible and appealing. Instead of seeing this as a failure, he saw it as a new challenge. For the next 48 hours, Daniel barely slept. He worked with his small team to develop a new pricing model, making the software more affordable for struggling businesses. He personally reached out to 10 potential clients who had previously rejected his offer. Within a week, 3 signed up. Within a month, he replaced the lost revenue, plus 20% more. Daniel realized something powerful. Success isn't about avoiding problems. It's about how fast you solve them. A year later, Daniel's company had grown beyond his wildest expectations. His customer base tripled, and he had expanded into 2 new countries. Then, he got an unexpected email. It was from Amazon Business Services. They were interested in partnering with him. Daniel couldn't believe it. The company that Jeff Bezos built, the man who had once given him life-changing advice, was now offering to collaborate with him. As he sat in his office preparing for the biggest business meeting of his life, he thought back to that conference years ago, to that one moment when he decided not to give up, to the words that had reshaped his journey. Failure is just practice for success. Or,